The next fractal we will be discussing is a problem dealing with the chaos game. Now we have a triangle here. There's 3 vertices to the triangle. We're going to be rolling an honest die and just performing the steps of the chaos game. So to set it up, A, that is located at the point 0, 0, or the origin. Vertex B is located at 32, 0. 32, this is the X part of the point, this is the Y part of the point. These little hash marks count by 2, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32. And the same is true here with C. C is 0, 32. That is the point, where 0 is the X coordinate and 32 is the Y coordinate. So we are just going to get started. The first thing we have to set up, there's 6 sides on a die. And so let's say that if you roll a 1 or a 2, that corresponds with vertex A. So a 1 or a 2. If you roll a 3 or a 4, that's going to correspond with vertex B. And if you roll a 5 or a 6, that is going to correspond with vertex C. So let's start with we have a list of rolls. Let's just say we had an honest dice and we rolled it. First we got a 3, then we got a 2, then we got a 5, then we rolled a 1, and then we rolled a 6. What we're going to do is plot the corresponding points. So with the chaos game, the first roll is always, that point is always plotted directly on the point in which it corresponds. So a roll of 3 corresponds with rolling a 3 or 4, which is vertex B. So I'm going to put a point directly on vertex B. And I'm going to call that P1 for point 1. Okay, so I'm going to label over here my point 1 is on the coordinate 32, 0. This is the X coordinate, this is the Y coordinate. Okay, good. So we are done with that one. Okay, let's talk about if we roll a 2. Well, what the chaos game states is if we roll a 2 corresponds with rolling a 1 or 2, vertex A. So the chaos game states that whichever point vertex it corresponds with and the last point, you mark the halfway distance. Okay, now when we're talking about the halfway distance between 2 points, what we're really referring to is the midpoint. What we need to do is we need to find the midpoint between point 1, which is 32, 0, and A, which is 0, 0. So this is for a roll 2. What we have here, this is the midpoint formula. You'll be using this. The midpoint formula says basically if you add up the X portions of both the points, this is point 1, this is point 2, you add up both of the X parts and then divide it by 2, that will be the X portion of the midpoint. And then if you add up the 2 Y portions of each point and divide it by 2, that will be the Y portion of the midpoint. So this is for roll 2. So here's our 2 points. The point 1, which is our first point, was 32, 0. And the point in which it corresponds with is A, which is 0, 0. So these are the 2 points where we have to find the midpoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to label each of these points. This is my first point, this is my second point. So I'm going to call this is the X part, and this is the Y part. Since this is my first point, I'm going to put a little subscript 1 there. And then since this is a second point, this is the X, this is the Y, I'm going to put a little subscript 2. So I have X sub 1, Y sub 1, X sub 2, Y sub 2, and then I'm just going to input it into my midpoint formula. So the first thing it says is I take the X part of point 1, which is 32, and I add it to the X part of the second point, which is 0. And then I divide the whole thing by 2. and then there's a comma, and then I do the same thing for the y's. Y sub 1 is 0 plus y sub 2 is 0, all divided by 2. And then I'm just going to simplify this, and once I simplify this, this is what's going to tell me the midpoint between my first point, point 1, and the corresponding vertex A. So 32 plus 0 is just 32 divided by 2, comma, 0 plus 0 is 0 divided by 2, equals 32 divided by 2 is 16. And 0 divided by 2 is just 0. So this is my point 2. My second point is 16, 0. So I'm going to put that right here. P2 is 16, 0. And then I'm just going to graph that. So these are in twos. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 is right here. And it's 0, so it's just right here. The y part is 0. So this is my P2. Okay. That's if I roll a 2. We're done with that one. Okay, now let's go on if I roll a 5. Well, which vertex corresponds with a 5? Well, C corresponds with a 5. So what I need to do is mark the midpoint between my last point, which was P2, and C, which is 0, 32. So I'm going to have to use the midpoint formula again. So here's my midpoint formula. This is for a roll 5. This was the last point I just plotted. This is a 5 corresponds with C, so I need to label my points x1, y1, x2, y2, and then I just input them into the formula. So my x1 is 16 plus my x2 is 0, all divided by 2, comma, my y1 is 0 plus my y2 is 32, and all of that is divided by 2. And then I just simplify, and this is going to give me the midpoint between these 2 points. So 16 plus 0 is 16 divided by 2. 0 plus 32 is 32 divided by 2. And 16 divided by 2 is 8. 32 divided by 2 is 16. So this tells me my third point. This is P3. My third point is going to be 8, 16, where the x part is 8 and the y part is 16. So I'm going to go here to my example. My third point, P3 equals 8, 16. And then I'm just going to plot that. So I'm going to plot the x part and then the y part. So 2, 4, 6, 8, and then 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Should be right there. 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Yes. So this is my third point right there. 8, 16. So my next roll is a 1. Well, 1 corresponds with A, and my last point was P3. So now I need to find the midpoint between these 2 points here, A and P3. Well, I know A is 0, 0, and I know that P3 is 8, 16. So we're just going to apply the midpoint formula again for when we roll a 1. I have my 2 points here, point 3, 8, 16, and A. And this is my x1, my y1, my x2, my y2. And then we're just going to plug them in. Again, it's just you repeat the same process. So x1 is 8 plus x2 is 0 divided by 2, comma, y1 is 16 plus y2 is 0 divided by 2. I end up 8 plus 0 is 8 divided by 2. 16 plus 0 is 16 divided by 2. I end up with 8 divided by 2 is 4. 16 divided by 2 is 8. So this is my fourth point, 4, 8. So my P4 is 4, 8, where 4 is the x part and 8 is the y part. We're just going to go ahead and plot that point. It's 2, 4, then go up in the y part, 2, 4, 6, 8. Right there, and it just looks halfway between those 2 points. And this is P4. And we're done with a roll 1. Our last one, a roll 6. Well, 6 corresponds with C. Our last point was P4, so now we need to find the midpoint between these 2 points. P4, which is 4, 8, and C, which is 0, 32. So we have our mid formula once more time. This is for a roll 6. Our last point was P4, which is 4, 8. C, which is 0, 32. We're going to label our points. This is x1, this is y1, this is x2, this is y2, and then we just input it into the midpoint formula to find that midpoint. So x1 is 4 plus x2, which is 0, all divided by 2, comma, y1 is 8 plus y2 is 32, all divided by 2. 4 plus 0 equals 4 divided by 2. 8 plus 32 is 40 divided by 2. We simplify that. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 40 divided by 2 is 20. This is our fifth point, P5, 220. So our fifth point, P5 is 220. And then the last thing we need to do is just plot that point, and then we're done. So these are all in 2. So this is 2, and then 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, right there. And that's the midpoint between these 2 points. That is P5. And you could just keep repeating the same process and keep plotting more points. But this is how you do the chaos game using the midpoint formula.